My name is Eleanor Voss. I was 58 when the police knocked on the door of the house I had lived in for 31 years. I remember the sound of the doorbell more than anything, that small, ordinary chime, and how strange it felt against the weight of what followed. I had been folding laundry in the sunroom, the one with the crooked window latch my late husband, Walter, never got around to fixing. I liked that latch. It reminded me of him every morning, a small imperfection I refused to correct. When I opened the door, there were two officers standing on the porch, and behind them, arms crossed, stood Priya, my son's wife, wearing the expression of someone who believed she had already won. "Mrs. Voss," the older officer said, not unkindly, "we've received a report that you're residing here without authorization." I did not understand at first. I laughed, actually a short, disbelieving sound, because the idea was so absurd it didn't register as real. This was my home. I had painted the trim myself the summer Daniel turned 12. I had buried my husband's ashes beneath the maple tree in the backyard, per his wishes, in a small ceremony that only the two of us, Daniel and I, had attended, because Priya said funerals made her anxious. "There's been some confusion," I said carefully, still holding a folded towel like a strange, useless shield. Priya stepped forward. "There's no confusion, Eleanor. Daniel and I own this house now. You need to gather your things." I looked past her, toward the driveway, hoping, foolishly, that Daniel would be there to explain, to correct her, to do what a son does. He wasn't. He was, I would learn later, at work, unaware that his wife had called the police on his mother that morning, confident that by the time he came home, the matter would already be settled. I did not raise my voice. I have never been a woman who raises her voice. Instead, I asked the officers quite calmly if they would like to come inside and look at something in my study. The study still smelled faintly of Walter's pipe tobacco, though he'd been gone 6 years. I kept his desk exactly as he'd left it, not out of sentimentality alone, but because some part of me had always known that a day like this might come, and that a woman needs her paperwork in order before anyone questions her right to exist somewhere. I opened the second drawer of the oak filing cabinet, the one with the sticky runner, and found the folder I was looking for. It was thin, unremarkable, labeled in Walter's handwriting. Deed, 47 Maplewood. I had not needed to look at it in years. I already knew what it said. The house had been purchased in 1994, 2 years before Daniel was born. In both our names, Walter and Eleanor Voss, joint tenants with right of survivorship. When Walter passed, the house had transferred to me alone, automatically, the way such things do. No transfer to Daniel. No transfer to anyone. It had never once, in 31 years, belonged to my son. I handed the folder to the younger officer, who read it with the flat, professional patience of someone who had seen every kind of family dispute imaginable. I watched his eyebrows lift slightly, not dramatically, just enough. "Ma'am," he said, looking up at Priya, "this deed lists Eleanor Voss as sole owner. Is there another document you're working from?" Priya's face did something complicated. I want to say I felt triumphant in that moment, but I didn't. I felt tired. I felt the particular exhaustion of a woman who has spent years being polite about things she should have addressed directly. "Daniel told me the house was going to be ours," Priya said, quieter now. "He said his mother was, that she wasn't going to need it much longer, that we'd talked about her moving somewhere smaller." I said nothing, but something in me went very still, the way water goes still right before it freezes. Because I had never had that conversation. Not with Daniel. Not with anyone. The officers left without incident, of course. There was nothing for them to enforce, no crime, no eviction, nothing but an assumption that had collapsed the moment it met paper. Priya left too, though not before saying, in a voice that tried and failed to sound gracious, that there had clearly been a misunderstanding and that she was sorry for the confusion. I did not respond to that. I have found over the years that silence is often the most honest answer available. I spent the rest of that day sitting in the sunroom, the folded laundry forgotten on the ottoman, turning over a single sentence in my mind. Daniel told me the house was going to be ours. I thought about the past 2 years. The subtle shift in how Daniel spoke to me on the phone, Shorter calls, more scheduling, less of the easy warmth we used to have. The way he'd started asking, gently but persistently, whether I'd thought about downsizing. The brochures for retirement communities that appeared, unrequested, in my mailbox, always arriving a few days after a visit from him and Priya. I had assumed these were expressions of concern. A son worrying about his aging mother, wanting her comfortable, wanting her cared for. Now I wondered if I had been reading a different story than the one actually being written. When Daniel called that evening, his voice was tight with an anger I didn't fully understand yet. "Mom, Priya told me what happened. I'm so sorry. She shouldn't have called anyone. That was completely out of line. I don't know what she was thinking." "Daniel," I said, "did you tell her this house would be yours?" There was a pause. Not a short one. "It's complicated," he said finally. "I have learned, in 58 years, that when someone says a simple yes or no question is complicated, they have usually already answered it. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I did what I often do when my mind won't settle. I went looking for Walter's letters. We had written to each other during the 2 years he worked overseas early in our marriage, long before Daniel was born, and I kept everyone in a shoebox at the top of my closet, tied with a ribbon that had faded from red to a dusty rose. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I think I simply wanted to hear his voice, even secondhand, on a day when I felt unmoored from my own life. One letter, from March of 1991, stopped me. "Ellie," he had written, "I keep thinking about what kind of home we're going to build. Not just the house, the family in it. I want us to build something that can't be taken from either of us by anyone, not even our own children, if it ever came to that. Does that sound strange? I suppose I just mean, I want you protected. Always." I sat on the floor of my closet for a long time, holding that letter, understanding for the first time how deliberate Walter had been. He had not put both our names on that deed by accident or by convention. He had done it because he had, even then, some quiet foresight about the fragility of family loyalty, how it could bend under the weight of money, of assumption, of a daughter-in-law's certainty that an aging woman's home was simply next in line to be claimed. I did not cry, though I came close. Instead, I felt something clarify inside me, not anger exactly, but resolve. Walter had protected me on paper 30 years ago. Now it was my turn to protect what he'd built, and to understand, clearly and without illusion, what my son had been willing to let happen in my own home. I invited Daniel and Priya to dinner the following Sunday. Not out of forgiveness and not out of anger, but because some conversations deserve a table between the people having them, something solid to rest your hands on while the truth gets said. I made the roast Walter used to love, more out of habit than sentiment, and set the table the way I always had: cloth napkins, the good plates, nothing performative, just what felt right. Daniel arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept well. Priya arrived looking like a woman preparing for battle, though I don't think she yet understood there wasn't going to be one. Not the kind she expected. "Mom," Daniel started, before we'd even sat down, "I want to explain." "You can explain during dinner," I said. "But I'd like to say something first, and I'd like you both to simply listen." They sat. I remained standing, which I hadn't planned, but it felt right, like I needed the room to hold what I was about to say. "This house was never yours to promise, Daniel. Not because I don't love you, and not because I don't want you to have a future. I do, more than anything. But your father and I built this home understanding that love and ownership are not the same thing, and that a mother's home is not an inheritance to be claimed while she's still living in it." Priya opened her mouth. I raised a hand, gently, and she closed it. "I don't believe you're a cruel woman, Priya. I believe you were given information that made a certain kind of sense to you, and you acted on it. That's not a moral failure. But it does mean you and I need to understand each other better than we currently do." I looked at my son. "And you, Daniel, you let your wife believe something that wasn't true, and you let that belief walk up to my front door with 2 police officers. I need you to sit with that. Not apologize for it quickly. Sit with it." The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower droned in the distance, absurdly ordinary against the weight of the silence inside. It took Daniel nearly a full minute to speak, and when he did, his voice had lost the defensive edge it carried on the phone. I told her the house would probably come to us eventually, he said slowly. Because I assumed it would. I never actually asked you what your plans were, Mom. I just assumed. And then when Priya kept asking about it, kept planning around it, I think I let the assumption become something more solid than it should have been, because it was easier than admitting I didn't actually know. And the officers? I asked. I didn't know she was going to do that, he said, and for the first time, I believed him completely. She told me afterward. Mom, I was furious. I still am. Priya's composure finally cracked, not into anger, but into something more honest. I panicked, she admitted. There's been pressure, financial pressure, on our end that I haven't told either of you about. I thought if the house was already ours on paper, it would solve something. I didn't think it through. I just wanted the fear to stop, and I made it your problem instead of dealing with it like an adult. I did not immediately soften. I let her words sit in the room, unanswered, because some truths need space around them before they can be metabolized by anyone, including the person who spoke them. I'm not interested in punishing either of you, I said finally. But I am interested in the truth being spoken plainly from now on in this family. No more letters that never get written. No more assumptions standing in for conversations. In the weeks that followed, I did not change the deed. I did not need to. It had always said exactly what it needed to say. What I changed instead was quieter, and in some ways harder. I met with an estate attorney, not out of spite, but out of the same clear-eyed foresight Walter had shown decades earlier. I wrote a will that specified, in plain and unambiguous language, exactly what would happen to this house and everything in it, so that no assumption, no whispered conversation between a husband and wife could ever again stand in for my actual wishes. I told Daniel about the will's existence, though not its contents. You'll know when it's time, I said. For now, I need you to know that I trust you enough to tell you the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient. I also, carefully, began rebuilding something with Priya, not the relationship we'd had before, which had been built more on politeness than honesty, but something new, forged in the aftermath of a mistake she was willing to own. She started calling, sometimes just to talk, no agenda behind it. Once, she asked if she could see photographs of Walter, and I understood that as its own kind of apology. I did not forget what had happened. I don't believe forgetting is required for forgiveness, or even necessary for it. I simply chose not to let a single terrible morning define the whole shape of my family going forward. I still sit beneath the maple tree some evenings, near where Walter's ashes rest, and I talk to him the way I always have, quietly, without expecting an answer. You knew, I told him once, this past autumn, watching the leaves loosen and fall the way they do every year, unhurried, unbothered by anything except the season's own timing. You knew a day might come when this house would need to protect me, not the other way around. The wind moved through the branches, and I let myself believe, just for a moment, that it was some kind of answer. I think often about the officer's face that morning. Not unkind, just doing his job, reading a piece of paper that settled, instantly and without argument, a truth that had nearly been overwritten by assumption. I think about how close I came to losing something not because anyone hated me, but because everyone around me had simply stopped asking and started assuming instead. I am 59 now. The house is quieter these days, but not emptier. Daniel visits more often, and he asks questions now instead of assuming answers. Priya brings flowers sometimes, small ones, unpretentious, the kind you'd pick from your own yard rather than buy to make a point. The deed still sits in the second drawer of the oak filing cabinet, in the folder Walter labeled decades ago in his careful, steady handwriting. I don't need to look at it anymore. I know what it says. It says this home is mine. It always was. And now, finally, everyone in my family understands that too, not because a piece of paper forced them to, but because a piece of paper gave us the chance to finally tell each other the truth. I think about that morning often, not with bitterness, but with a strange kind of gratitude. It taught me that love and ownership aren't the same thing, and that even the people who love us most can let assumption stand in for the truth if too much goes unspoken for too long. The deed never changed. What changed was everything around it. The silence in my family, the conversations we'd been avoiding, the comfort we'd mistaken for understanding. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a woman standing calmly in her own doorway, holding a folder that has said the same true thing for 31 years, waiting for everyone else to catch up to it. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether you've ever had to quietly stand your ground the way I did. And if these stories speak to you, subscribe and stay a while. There's always another woman, another house, and another quiet truth waiting to be told.